Welcome to the Finance Marketing Podcast, a show that empowers finance professionals to market their businesses in ways that feel good and actually achieve results. I'm your host, Hillary. I've been working with folks in financial services to develop marketing strategies that work and create results-oriented marketing content since 2020. And I've learned a lot about what works in finance marketing, what doesn't work, and where financial services pros get stuck. Join us each Friday as we explore real, effective ways to market your finance business and connect with folks who truly embody your ideal clients. Today, I am chatting with Michael Collison, a wonderful client of mine who I've worked with on overall marketing strategy as well as LinkedIn strategy and posting specifically. Michael is a financial independence coach who helps people unplug from the financial matrix and achieve FIRE. And Michael has niched down his financial coaching practice in some really interesting and specific ways that I'm very excited to share with you. In this conversation, we're discussing the unique ways that Michael connects with his niche in his marketing and how he's identified gaps on the platforms that he's showing up on where his audience hangs out so that he can position himself as an expert. Now, I do have to warn you, Michael and I nerd out quite a bit about FIRE and YNAB on this podcast episode because we both find them to be such wildly fascinating topics with lots of things to say. So unlike most other episodes of the Finance Marketing Podcast, where we're focusing almost solely on marketing and marketing strategies, Michael and I spend a little bit more time than usual talking about specific financial concepts in addition to his marketing strategies. With that said, this was such a fun conversation to have, and I know that you'll still get a lot out of it. So let's jump in. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Finance Marketing Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Hillary. I had a great Memorial Day weekend. I got to use my grill yesterday, so I'm excited. I'm rested. I'm
Oh,
ready to go.
I'm so glad. My husband had both his smoker and his grill going on opposite
Okay.
sides of the backyard. So
I, I need I need to get a smoker, but
yeah,
but my
go
wife
ahead.
tells me it's not in YNAB yet. So
You know what? I bought
yeah.
him his kind of on a whim last year for
Okay.
his birthday, and
Yeah.
it wasn't in YNAB, and we had to do some
Right.
rearranging. So,
Right.
well, that's actually I'm so excited to talk with you. I know we're going to talk about YNAB today.
Yep.
And just for all of our listeners, you have been and are continuing to be a client of mine, and so we've worked really closely on
hmm
your marketing strategy. So I would love to start if you can just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what it is
hmm
that you do.
How far back do you want me to go?
As far back as you want to go.
Okay, because I'm an engineer first, so I always want to give context. So y- I retired last year, 2023, from a close to a 40-year career as a software developer. So I'm an engineer first. So I think logically, I think coming up with solutions to problems. But I would say probably somewhere around the year 2000, I started getting really interested in the financial markets, particularly because I lost a lot of money in the dot-com boom, and thinking like an engineer in my mind is like, wait a minute, I have to solve this problem. What is going on here? And I took a little detour and I started doing things like developing trading strategies. I even took a detour and went and worked for effectively what's called a hedge fund that trades commodities, things like oil, corn, wheat, those kinds of things, develop trading strategies. And that was a fascinating deep dive, but I realized I didn't want to work on Wall Street. There's a lot of stress and pressure there that I didn't want, and went back to engineering. But I always was fascinated by the market. So I was always dabbling, always trying to figure out ways of working in the market. And at the same time, I was trying to figure out, how do I retire? The big thing that I recall thinking about is, okay, I have this amount of money in my 401k. But how does that translate into retirement? You would see articles in Forbes and Market Watch saying you need $1 million, you need $2 million, and I was like, well, how do they get that?
Mm.
How do you come up with that? And um, I struggled with that for a long time until I encountered the FIRE movement and the idea of the FIRE number. And I was like, wow, that's actually really really simple and straightforward. This idea of 4%. You can withdraw 4% and you can live on that. Now, I'll be honest, I do things slightly differently where I tend to live on the dividends. So instead of
Really?
me withdrawing 4%, I actually just say, okay, I have this much and my dividends are giving me this much. So I actually don't even have to worry about the 4% rule. So, but that's a separate subject. But the FIRE movement is the one that kind of set me down that path of how do you figure things out for yourself. And then the other thing in looking back that I realized was budgeting was so paramount because I can remember so many times in my journey, saying, hey, put money in the 401k and saving money outside the 401k. And then there'd be a month where I'd be like, oh my God, I got to take money out of investments. And the
Mm,
simple answer is we were overspending. I didn't have a budget. And, there would be various times I didn't know how to handle credit cards. And when I ran into YNAB, I was like, okay, this is what I want. Because I ran into YNAB at a point where, I was in that cycle where, you know, pay off debt, and then 9 months later you're right back into debt because you haven't solved the underlying issue, which is overspending. So it
mm,
doesn't matter. People always talk, Mike, how do I increase my credit score? How do I get out of debt? And I would say, well, do you have a budget? Do you know why you're overspending? Because if you don't tackle that, nothing else matters. And so, sort of retroactively, as I was doing the fire movement, I realized how key budgeting was in order to be able to fire. Because the fire movement spends so much time talking about investing and withdrawing, and they just assume that you know what your fire number is, and they assume that you know how much you're going to need. And in talking with most of my clients, most people don't have much of an idea of how much they actually need. So
right.
that was the other really key building block for me was, wow, you've got to be able to budget. You have to be able to know what your fire number truly is um, before you can actually be financially independent or financially independent, retire early. So that was really key for me.
Well, okay, two things here. So two things stuck out to me. Well, I mean, your whole story is fascinating, but it sounds like there were two things that you discovered throughout your
Hmm.
story that really kind of like gave you the momentum to
Yeah.
to make changes, and those were fire and YNAB. So
Yes.
I'm assuming that most of my listeners are familiar with at least the fire movement.
Hmm.
Let's just give a brief overview, just in case, of both fire and YNAB. What are those acronyms, and what do they really mean?
Sure. I'll start with YNAB. YNAB stands for You Need a Budget.
Hmm.
And in my opinion, it's the best budgeting tool out there because it focuses on real life. YNAB, when I try to describe it to people, it's kind of like the Matrix, where it's like you have to see it to understand it. But essentially, in my mind, it's a digital envelope system where you put money in envelopes and you decide ahead of time where you want to spend your money. I think of the idea of going back in the 70s when we didn't have direct deposit, when we didn't have credit cards, where you get paid and you'd go to the bank and cash your check and you'd dump the money out on the kitchen table and then you'd write your bills on envelopes and put the money in those envelopes. And at some point, there's no more money on the table and everything is in envelopes. And you've made a decision on how you want to spend your money. But the key thing in YNAB is that differentiates it from Quicken and a lot of other budgeting programs is you should decide ahead of time how much money you want to spend. So I found that a lot of my clients, when they start working with me, they are in the mode of expense tracking, meaning, oh yeah, we spent this amount, this amount, this amount, but they haven't actually decided ahead of time if they actually wanted to spend that amount of money. Meaning, I'll have a client that'll spend $300 on eating out, and they'll just check that off. But did you mean to spend $300 on eating out? That's the differentiator, and that's where YNAB kind of inverts everything. Where other budgeting programs, you just track it and say, yeah, I spent that, but you
Hmm.
might not have wanted to spend that, and that might not be in alignment with your priorities. And so for me, that was the really key thing. And then the other part of YNAB is how they handle credit cards, where you treat your credit cards effectively like a debit card.
Hmm.
Um, I think of our financial system as very predatory, and that's a core part of my marketing where I talk about unplugging people from the matrix. And I think one of the greatest tricks that our financial system has pulled on people is to think of their credit card bill like a subscription, meaning you pay Netflix every month. Well, you make the minimum payment on your credit card every month.
Mm-hmm.
And in that vein, you'll never pay it off because you'll pay down a little bit and then you'll go right back to putting more stuff on the credit card. So for me, those two things about being intentional about where you want to spend your money and handling credit cards such that you don't go into further debt, for me, are the two big things about YNAB. Go ahead.
I was just gonna jump in and say, you know this. I don't know if my listeners know this. I am also deeply in love with YNAB, and that's one of the
Hmm.
things that you and I kind of bonded over. Um,
Hmm.
and there's a couple of things, that I just kind of want to add in here, to piggyback off of what you said. It's not only is it the most, I think, planning friendly budgeting tool I've ever
Hmm.
found, but it's also the most flexible budgeting
Yeah.
tool I've ever found. It
Hmm.
allows you to get really granular about what types of financial goals you're setting, and
Right.
set really specific dates, but I want to reach it by this time, or this is a
Hmm.
goal I want to reach monthly because I know I'm going to spend it down, or so it's really flexible. And I also agree with you. I think so many people, and maybe you want to get to this yourself, but so many people in the FIRE movement specifically like to use credit cards like debit cards. And YNAB really seems to be one of the only budgeting tools out there that doesn't treat a credit card just as like a debt payoff
Right.
category. It's like
Hmm.
you can use it as a debit card to cover your expenses, so you can get all of those wonderful points and rewards and things like that we love credit cards for. Um,
Exactly.
but we can still categorize the transactions as if they were debit card transactions and just pay it off every
Hmm.
single month, right?
And what you just said is a huge shift in thinking for most people because almost every client I've worked with, they're like, "So, Mike, how do I categorize my credit card?" And the whole point is you don't categorize your credit card, you categorize the transactions on your credit card. And that's where I say that the credit card industry has people thinking about their credit card bill as a subscription because they just think of it as Netflix, just
Mm,
my minimum payments and whatever. The other thing about YNAB that I didn't mention is true expenses, because this was the other key turning point for me. I can remember so many times in the past where I would need to get new tires, or you bring your car in for a 60,000 or 120,000 mile service, and you know how much the service costs, but then they call you and they say, "Mr. Collison, we found this," and I'll say, "How much?" And they'll say, "That'll be an extra $600." And then you like, okay, well, which one is most important? Then you start,
right.
it's like, well, I'll pick three out of the six, so I'll pick two out of the seven, right? Whereas with true expenses, I like to think of our budget as your bills that most people know are on the surface, like an iceberg. And most people see that, but they don't see what's underneath the surface, and they don't see the car repair. They don't see the new tires. They don't see the AC that has to be replaced. They don't see the roof that has to be replaced. And when I started putting money away for those things, and then the money was just there, um, it was just revolutionary. As an example, as you said, you like to get granular. Well, in our budget, um, we're very granular with our automobiles. So, for
Mm,
example, we have categories for purchasing new cars. Our cars are paid off. We have a category for registering our cars. We have a category for tires. We have a category for maintenance. And then we have a category for repair. And a lot of people ask me why we separate repair from maintenance. Well, maintenance is when you take your car in, I have to get the oil changed. That's maintenance. Repair is when they call you and tell you you need that $600 or $800.
mhm.
You don't know how much it's going to be, but you know it's going to be a lot. And so I separate those things out. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I had a client that I was working with that had a sports car, and um, they thought that their expense was the monthly payment and insurance and gas. And when I finished working with them, I showed them that their all-in cost was about $1,600 a month,
Oh,
and they
wow.
sold the car 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And they sold the car 2 weeks later because it was not in alignment with their priorities, which was fire.
Mm.
So that's one example.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. Well, let's give a brief overview,
Oh,
of FIRE. What is
right.
FIRE?
So FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. And FIRE is the closest thing to the matrix that I can think of where um, this country, capitalism says, go to college, work hard, and when you're 62 or 65, you can retire. The FIRE movement says, I don't want to wait until I'm 65 because I might die within a couple of years. I've literally had a friend die within a year of retiring.
Hmm.
FIRE says, I can actually decide if I start early enough when I want to retire. It actually puts you back in control. So for me, the financial independence piece, and you can really break FIRE up into two pieces: the FI piece, financially independent, versus the RE piece, retire early. The financial independence piece says this is how much money you need to be financially independent. You might not decide to retire. You might say, I want to work part time. You might say, I want to work in a different career. Most people that I actually talk to about FIRE don't want to retire early. They just want to do something different. They want to do something meaningful with their life. A lot of people want to give back, and a lot of people are stuck in dead end jobs. And so for me, the FIRE movement is a way to say, I actually get to take control. I don't have to be satisfied with the status quo of working in a job I don't like for 40 years. But if I'm really diligent, if I save and invest, I might be able to retire at 40, 45. And there's some stories of people retiring at 35, 37.
Right.
So for me, that is the attractiveness, and that's what the FIRE movement is. And if I could sum it up in one word, it would be freedom and flexibility. Well, it's two words, but yeah,
Mm-hmm. So, and that is what you now do. You were able to retire from your corporate career, and now
hmm
you get to do. You've started a business, which is also something that I hear a lot of fire achievers doing. They get to start a business
right,
without the pressure of it having
exactly.
to cover your monthly expenses from the get-go, right?
Yes,
Or even
yes,
ongoing.
yeah,
And so that's what you do now is you help other people, you coach other people um, towards reaching their fire
FIRE.
goal.
hmm
And so I would love to dive into kind of the marketing side now,
Okay.
because you have such a very specific niche. And you and I kind of
hmm
talked about this a little bit before we hit the record button. And I would love to dive into that with you again. You have really three specifics in your niche.
hmm
And so I'm going to pass it over to you if you want to tell us, kind of how you landed on this niche and what the
hmm
benefits are of getting this. We've been using the word granular, but what the
Right.
benefits are of getting this granular with your
Yeah.
niche.
Yeah, so initially when I first retired, I actually thought I was going to do more teaching, like
Mm,
financial literacy. That's what I was initially thinking about. And, I started researching that and I realized, you know what? And I kind of ran across coaching, started researching that. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I actually want to work with people one on one or in small groups. So that was sort of the first revelation for me was, okay, coaching, not teaching, right? And coaching is really more, you do have some teaching, but you get people to the point where they're able to make their own decisions. So that's what was attractive for me for coaching. Then initially I thought, well, I'm just going to teach everybody because everyone needs to be financially literate. But just spent some time talking with people, asking them what they needed. And because I'm a software engineer, I know a lot of engineers and also talk with my wife a lot. And then just sort of, I'll be honest, I sort of stumbled upon it, which is what happens with a lot of people. And I stumbled upon the idea of segmentation or niching down. And I don't think I actually told you this. You wanted to know something that I hadn't told you before. I had tried to start my own business back in 1999 in the tech related field. So I wrote a complete business plan, 200 pages, went to venture capitalists. So I knew about market segmentation and the importance of understanding who your customer was. So it wasn't that foreign to me. It was really more who did I want to focus on. And so it was really more talking with people, kind of experimenting with some various tools that I kind of hit on fire. And so for me, the most important reason that I chose the fire community was their motivations.
mm,
In working with non-ideal clients, they didn't have the same motivation.
mm,
Fire people, true fire adherents are actually motivated to actually retire early. And I was like, that's ideal. You
right.
want to retire early, you're looking for tools, ideas, tips, tricks, working with someone that can maybe get you over the top. And so that was really sort of the cherry on top is the fact that these people are motivated. Because if you have to go to a customer base and they're not motivated, well, then you're just dragging people along, and that's not what you want. So that was the big reason when I really sat back and looked at the 50,000-foot view of these people are already motivated to do this.
Mm.
So that was the real key for me.
Wow. Yeah, I actually didn't know that about you, about why that's kind
hmm
of why you focused or decided to focus on fire. And I think that's really powerful. Of course, you want clients who are excited by what you do and about what
hmm
they can do.
Yep.
because it's a very participative process when you talk about
Right.
coaching, right? It's not just
Hmm.
you hire me and I'll do the work for you. That is not
Right.
what coaching is by
Right.
any means. Now, the other piece of this is you, I don't know if require is the right
Hmm.
word, but you strongly encourage your clients to use YNAB. And so that kind
I
of
do.
further specifies your niche. Can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. So it was really due to my experience. So I thought about, all the struggles I had, what YNAB could do for you, and then I thought about what I thought was the weakness in the fire community, which is they say, well, in order to be financially independent, and my apologies if I didn't say this earlier, you should have 25 times your annual expenses. Well, as an engineer, first thing I thought of was, well, what are your annual expenses?
Mm,
And from working with a lot of people, I realized most people don't actually know your annual expenses. And here's what I mean by that. Before I retired, I sat down with my wife and we actually created a retirement budget. So we actually knew almost to the penny what we needed.
mm,
And the reason that that's so important is many people think of their annual expenses as just their bill. So they'll take, they're like, oh, $4,000 a month. And then you multiply that by 12, multiply it by 25. But as I said earlier, what they fail to consider is you're going to retire at 40. Well, you're going to need health insurance.
mhm,
You're going to need dental insurance. You're going to need eye insurance. And it's going to be much more expensive, I can tell you, than the plan that you got in corporate America. You're going to need to include deductibles, higher copays. And so that retirement budget, that financial independence budget that I call it, is much more extensive than a lot of people think. So what I learned was you can't just wing it. And then
mm,
I said, wow, YNAB is absolutely ideal for that. Because YNAB, if you allow it, will show you, exactly what you need if your budget is specific enough. And I just thought that that was ideal for the fire movement because many people in the fire movement, they're playing with spreadsheets and they're always playing with the numbers. And I was like, that's an ideal match
mhm.
to actually get really specific and understand what your numbers are. So that
Yeah,
that's why I made that decision. Yeah.
it really is. And, I know a lot of people in the fire movement either start with or eventually read the book, Your Money or Your Life.
Hmm.
And when I was first reading that book, I had already been using YNAB for several years. And
Okay.
so going through her exercises, it was like, I actually don't have to dig that deep to figure a lot of this stuff out. And
Right.
she's asking you to go through the pennies. Some of it you still kind of do.
Yep.
But it was really, really, really nice to have all of that financial data there that, I always thought, well, it's nice to have if I ever need it. But then I realized
Yeah.
how much it could actually help me plan for the future, which is just so
Yep.
powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The one last thing I was going to say is the other thing that I thought that made it so relevant to the fire movement is the cost of being wrong with
Mm,
your fire number is actually really high. If
right.
you get in there and you could be off easily by a factor of two, you could, because if you're just thinking your annual expenses are your bills, and some people retire, hit their fire number in their mid 30s. They may not even have had kids yet. They may be married, they haven't had kids, and they haven't factored in childcare expenses, they haven't factored in college expenses. So I mean, there's so many things that you really need to get really specific on. And we really haven't been taught to think that way. We're really taught to think really just about our monthly bills.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, do you find in working, on your own fire journey and in working with
Hmm.
clients, is the fire number that they end up calculating, is it
Hmm.
higher than what they thought they would need? Is it lower, or was it
Hmm.
really just they had no idea?
It's higher than
It's
they
higher.
needed, and the reason it's higher is because of the true expenses that we talked about. Those hidden expenses that they don't think about. The
Mm,
cost to replace. Most people that I talk to at this point have houses, and they don't think about replacing the AC and the roof and the plumber coming out every year, and all those various things that could go wrong. And because owning a house is expensive,
mhm,
and depending on the kind of car you own, it can be very expensive. And so when you begin to reveal a lot of these things, and people have very expensive vacation plans, and so people don't think about all those things. And what happens? You put it on the credit card, and
mm.
then of course, as you know, that's a very expensive way to try to purchase something. So
And is that demotivating for people, or is it more just kind of motivation to, okay, I got to get even more serious about this?
Right. So that's an interesting question. And I think I have a two-part answer. What I found is for some people that are not my ideal client, it was demotivating. I've
Mm,
definitely had people that said, this is too much. I
mm,
don't, some people don't want to know.
right.
I've had people that are really struggling with their budgets and don't have enough income, and they just put their head in the sand and they don't want to know.
Mm,
I have found for my ideal clients, it's actually motivating, and it's a huge revelation where they were like, I never thought about that before.
mm, mhm,
I worked with a client who owned a couple of rental properties, not married yet, late 20s, and when they actually plugged in the numbers, so we did the YNAB thing first, and then we used a tool that will allow them to simulate early retirement. And what they realized was the rental properties were a huge drag because of the
mm,
annual expenses on the rental property. Like, you
mm,
and they realized that getting rid of the rental properties was actually the key to actually being able to retire early. So a lot of people just think, make certain assumptions, and then you start using the tools, and it's like, that's not
mm.
what I thought it was. So
Wow.
I've had revelations like that happen. Yeah.
That's so powerful because so many people in the fire movement are like, property, property, property,
Hmm. Yep.
flipping and renting and things like
Hmm.
that. So super, super powerful to just we just want to look at the numbers, right? And make
Yeah.
objective
Exactly.
decisions and kind of tune
Hmm.
out all the noise out there
Yeah.
as well, which I think is the huge benefit of working with a coach one on one, because the coach is going to be able to help you see your true numbers.
Hmm.
Now, the third part of your niche that we haven't talked about, which is really what most people think about when it comes to niching, is who is your target demographic or psychographic. So we've talked about, you help them do one specific thing, you use a specific tool. Who are the
Hmm.
specific type of people that you really love to work with?
Yeah, so it's definitely fire adherence.
Hmm.
People who are motivated and want to retire early. People who, as I said, a lot of these people are saying, the system is okay now, but I don't know if I want to do this,
Hmm.
20 years from now. Um, it turns out that there's about three or four different fields that are highly represented in the fire movement, right?
Hmm.
If you want to go one level deeper, one of them is engineers or people in IT. It's not just engineers, because you may have somebody that may work for a tech company, but they may be in sales or product management, might be a VP, but
Hmm.
people that work in IT. The healthcare industry, the financial services industry, and it turns out that people tend to be more highly compensated in those industries, so
Right.
they have extra money that they can use in order to hit the fire number. The brutal reality is there's some people that don't have enough income, right, to be able to save extra. If you know anything about the fire movement, you hear people that are retiring at 35 and 40, but what you don't hear is that some of those people are saving 75% of their take home pay, right?
Right.
In order to hit that, at 10 to 20% savings, it's still going to take you 35 or 40 years. If you
Right.
really want to accelerate, you have to accelerate the savings. And then that leads us back to YNAB. Well, where's the money going to come from?
Hmm.
Right. And one other thing I didn't talk about is prioritization, right? With YNAB, my wife and I, when we sat down, finally, said, what are the most important things to us? And that was another key because, we said things like retiring early, having money for the kids to go to college, and there were two or three other things. And I found that by doing that, it lessened the motivation to go and get these other things because there was always a comparison for me where I could say,
Mm.
is this thing how does this thing stack up to retire early? And I'm looking at that. I'm like, that's $1,000 I can put in my in my after retirement money. So when I looked at it that way, and I was like, no, that's not worth it to me.
Right.
Because that might mean I have to work an extra 3 months or 6 months. It's a brutal reality, but I did think of it that way, and I still do,
Mm.
even
Mm.
even in retirement. Yeah,
Having that single question that you can ask, you know,
yeah,
is this worth the cost of this? Is
yes,
such an important, I think, mindset shift when you're working towards a goal.
hmm
Um, I would love to ask you, I don't think I've asked you this before.
hmm
How old were you and your wife when you first started this journey?
I was probably I would say late 40s.
Late
it
40s.
yeah, as far as the fire movement is concerned, it was definitely late.
Mm,
I would say I was um, lucky or fortunate, blessed, because working in the IT industry, I was able, I was had a good salary, and I don't know if I told you this at one point at the end, I was actually doing two jobs,
hmm
um, and then on top of that, a lot of people call this a fire accelerator. So a lot of people in the fire movement, they're talking about, okay, how much can I save for my income? And then some people fire movement will go get a second job, side hustle, and then I found the third accelerator was stock options
hmm
or restricted stock units. Because depending on who you work for, that could be a quarter of your salary, half of your salary. In some tech companies, it can be equal to all of your salary. Well, what can that do for getting you early to to fire? So
Right.
yeah, so all of those things sort of come in. Yeah.
Mm. Well, okay. I would love to talk to you about because you and I have worked on your marketing strategy
Hmm.
together, and so
Yes.
you're really starting on LinkedIn, and you're doing something on LinkedIn that I haven't heard many people do, and you are
Yep.
actually starting your own LinkedIn group. So let's talk
Yes.
a little bit about that.
Yep. So what gave me the idea was there are a fair number of fire groups on Facebook
hmm
and budgeting groups and things like that, and they're very active. And they'll be typically what somebody will come in and say, hey, my wife and I, we're this age and we're trying to hit fire, and these are our assets, and these are our bills. Can we hit fire? And every week the questions are like that. But on LinkedIn, that's not the case. There's two fire groups, and they're just full of promotion, not spam, but just promotion. And about 2 months ago, I saw somebody ask a question. They said, hey, I thought this was supposed to be a group for learning how to fire. And that sort of sparked an idea. And I said, well, why can't we have one of those? And so that sparked the idea to actually create the group. So I literally just created it last week, and I'm planning to start sending out invitations this week and starting to put content in there. So the idea was just go to people who are already in those other groups that are dead
hmm
and no one is engaging in, and actually create a group where people can actually engage and actually talk about their fire journey and questions that they have, and answering other people's questions. So that's actually the simple concept behind it.
I think this is so smart. You've identified a really unique hole in the
Hmm.
space, right? Because I think a
Right.
lot of people, especially people in your target market who are maybe in their 30s or their 40s,
Hmm.
um, they don't want to be spending a lot of time on Facebook anymore. A lot of people
Right.
in this demographic are not wanting to spend time on Facebook, and a lot of them are spending time on LinkedIn because
Yes.
they're networking. And LinkedIn, I think, is a really underestimated, vibrant social media platform.
I
And
agree.
so to have a group there for this demographic, I think it's going to take off. I'm really excited to see what happens with
I hope
it,
so. Yeah.
Michael.
Yeah.
And I'm actually, I actually think this is going to make your marketing a lot easier because we've also talked about you starting a YouTube channel, and I can
Hmm.
ask you about that. I don't know where you're at with that. We haven't talked about it
Yeah.
in a while, but there were some hesitations. You have
Yeah.
to show up on camera. It's what am I going to talk
Yeah.
about? Is it going to be just me, or do I have to find people to talk to, or
Right.
what's it going to be? And that's understandable for a lot of people. Is some of these marketing channels, even though they're right for your audience, they may not be
Right.
totally right for you, right?
Exactly.
And I think what this group is going to do is it's going to give you a whole audience that you have access
Yeah.
to that you can engage with in ways that are a little bit more comfortable for now.
Hmm.
Will YouTube be added down the road? Maybe, maybe
It
not.
will. It
Yeah,
will.
it
It's going
will.
to happen.
It
It's going to
will.
happen. It's going to happen. I
Well,
don't. The funny thing is, I don't know why, and we've talked about this. Like, I have no problem talking to you and being on camera here. It's only the idea of like recording myself. I don't know what it is. It's probably my demographic, being a late baby boomer or whatever, and not growing up with social media. So
right.
it's probably more of that. I look at my kids in their 20s. Well, actually, the funny thing is, I have three children. One of them is very active on social media. The other two are not actually.
Mm,
But my son-in-law is. He's actually very active. So, but people in their 20s, they're very comfortable. They're recording themselves all the time, and I'm clutching
right.
my pearls like, oh my God.
Well, I don't know, Michael. I'm
So,
I'm in my 30s, and the thought of me showing up on camera alone too is also very intimidating. Hence why I
oh, okay.
started a podcast where I'm talking with people. It just felt like a
Okay.
lot easier uh, way to kind of create content for me. So
Sure.
I understand where you're coming from
Yeah.
completely. But
Yeah.
yeah, I do think YouTube is right for your demographic, though, the
I,
target market.
I know it is. I know it is.
Right, right. Well, Michael, this has been such a great conversation. I'm so excited to circle back with you in a few months or so and kind of see how the LinkedIn Fire Group is going. I do think you're going to
Okay.
get a lot of interest, a lot of engagement in there. So that'll be really fun to kind of watch and help you with as well. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, so I have a website, yourfirejourney.coach, and they can also find me at LinkedIn. You just go to linkedin.com/Michael Collison, Collison. So those are the two main places. Yeah,
Great. I'll provide links to the show notes in there. And then you also have a downloadable guide as well, right?
that's right. Yeah, that's on my website, yourfirejourney.coach. Absolutely.
Okay,
Hmm.
great. Well, we'll link
Yeah.
to that too. One final question for you, Michael, that
Hmm.
I like to ask everyone. What advice do you have for somebody who is maybe just starting out on their marketing journey and is trying to figure out,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, what do I do? There's so many
Yeah.
options.
I would say the number one thing is to niche down and figure out who your
Hmm.
target market is.
Hmm.
It's actually funny that you mentioned, I'm actually talking with a gentleman that I did some consulting work with. He did some consulting work for me in my business in my I because I haven't mentioned this. I also have my own high tech business where I've done some consulting on the side, right?
Great.
So he did some work with me, and it's primarily focused on financial services, creating automated trading strategies.
Mm,
So recently, he's kind of gone out on his own, and he's trying to create his own company doing this. And so we've been talking on WhatsApp, and I asked him, "Who's your customers?" So when he mentioned the customers, I was very familiar with him. I was like, "I don't think that's going to work for you." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "Well," I said, "Have you calculated your profit margin?" He goes, "No." So he went off, and a day later he came back and he said, "Oh," he said, "What I'm going to charge is not going to sustain me based on the target market." And he was looking at retail, meaning individual clients.
mm,
And so I challenged him and I said, "Have you thought about going to institutional clients?"
mhm,
And he said, "Yeah, okay." And we've been trading some ideas back and forth. And he said, "Well, and this is what I'm thinking about offering them." And I'm saying all that to say is that everything comes back to your niche market.
mhm,
um, there's a book called I'm looking at it, Business Model Generation. I don't know if
mm.
you've heard of it. And basically, they provide a canvas for you to create your business model. And so, and it's good for us adults because there's a lot of pictures in it. And essentially, you put the canvas up on the wall and you start filling it in. Like you say, okay, this is my target market, this is my value proposition, this is my cost basis, this is how I'm going to do customer support. And it turns out that depending on who your customer is, all of those things change.
Mm,
Because if you're going to support just retail traders, well, the way you do customer support is going to be completely different than if you're supporting a hedge fund that's generating $250 million a year in profits and how you sell to them. And
right.
so I've been pushing to him, who's the target market? What are you selling to them? So to answer your question, the target market, the niche, everything comes back to that, and it's going to determine your profitability. It's going to determine the structure of your business. It's going to determine how you sell, customer support, everything.
Yep.
And the last thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to niche down. Don't be afraid to get really specific, right? Because you can't say, "Oh, I'm going to sell to all customers in the United States of America." That's not going to work.
Right.
That's simply just not going to work, right?
Right. Just from the perspective of all the different things that you'll have to be doing and
Right.
taking care of and managing and things like that. It's so much better
Yeah,
to have this is one specific thing that I do and help you with.
exactly.
It makes your
And
life so
what
much easier.
separates me, exactly. And it's what separates you as well.
Yep.
Hmm.
Well, Michael, this has been so great. Such a great conversation. I just want to say thank you again for sharing your time with us. And
Thank you, Hillary.
yeah, it's been great. And thanks to all of our listeners for joining us on this episode of the Finance Marketing Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Finance Marketing Podcast. If you're eager to market your business in a way that feels good and actually gets results, sign up for the Finance Marketing Podcast newsletter in the show notes so you never miss another episode. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite listening app and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you back here next Friday.